So over to you, Robbie.
Okay, thank you. Our plan was to start off with a little Klinkhamer and parachute emerger. And,
what size is that one, Robert?
so this is on a fully mill check nymph 16, but I find these hooks tend to tie almost a size bigger. They're quite a big hook by the time you go around the bend. Oh. Just chew on. I'll just quickly lay an underbody, and then I tend to tie these without taking the thread off or reattaching it, and I'll do it in a similar way as Bob Wyatt did the original deer hair emerger. So I'll dub the body down and then rivet with the tying thread coming back up. I'm just using some olive hare's ear type dubbing. This is actually the Eco Warrior dub from Fulham. Quite nice stuff. It's easy to dub on.
Bitte die Altpapiertonne rausbringen.
If any of you guys have got any questions, if you unmute yourself, ask Robbie the question and then mute yourself again, please.
Please just shout out with anything. So I tend to tie these flies with quite a slim abdomen. Helps them dig in. Yeah, a bit of a lump there. Then just spiral it back up in fairly even open turns. Take the thread to roughly where I want the post to be. I'll just catch your post on with a couple of wraps of thread. And if I lift it up, I can then position it and pull it back into place with the tying thread, tight thread. And just re-dam in front. And behind. And then I'll, oops.
Fiddly little critters, isn't it?
Can be. Always works with an audience. So I probably should have mentioned I'm using it's a nano silk, a GSP thread in 18 knot, so it's nice and thin. And it's a good strong thread, so it's easy. It's easy to tie with for the body and rib, and it keeps the post slim, and I find it easier not to keep a tidier tie in for the hackle. Should be enough for the post. That makes it a bit easier to build up the dam behind it. And then, right, for the hackle. Let's check that's about right. I quite like the hackle to come out to at least a bit the back of the bend of the hook. And I'll strip off some more of these. But, so, you know, some people like the hackle to tie it in with the good side facing down, that curves up. Well, I know other people like it the opposite way around, so it's more like an umbrella. I tend to tie it with the good side of the hackle facing down. And the step that's probably not necessary, but I like to do, is to strip one side of the feather. It keeps the hackle neater when you're winding it. It's probably more for the tires and the angler than it is for the fish, but it's just looks neater, I suppose. I want to make sure I've got in just a little bit of bare hackle at the top of the post, or bare stem at the top of the post, so the first wrap doesn't put any hackle barbs down the way or at funny angles. At least that's the intent. I'll catch it in, I'll fold over the waist barb to save me having to flitter about with scissors, trimming it. And then I'll wrap it up the post. Oops. Try not to catch the hackle in.
What material did you use for the post, please?
So that's some of the Fulling Mills parapost yarn that they've brought out. It's quite nice. It's actually comes in quite a generous packet, but there's also, it's not on a card, so it's on a hank, so that you don't have any kinks in it.
Yeah.
So which is quite handy.
Yeah, I've been using Aero Wing to start off with, but it's so bushy, it just gets caught in everything.
Yeah. There's definitely a treatment on that Fulling Mill stuff. You can feel it on your fingers when you pull it together, and I think that maybe helps it stick together a little bit.
We hope sharing his story.
Oops, wrong stuff. So this one, you could change the material for the thorax, darker dubbing or a peacock ice dubbing, but I don't think it makes that much difference for I tend to just tie them all with the same shape, almost as a very similar to a deer hair emerger, and used in a similar way. But I'll dub the thorax slightly heavier, just to give the appropriate sizing and impression. Try and get the hook out of the way. And yeah, try not to catch in the post material. I'll take the dubbing close to the eye, so just dampening my fingers to help me get the dubbing tight. Take it up, and then just need a little bit more, because I want to dub the thorax and finish with my thread at the back of the wing post. That way it helps me cover up, hopefully it shows up on screen, cover up the thread at the tying point. And now what I'll do is turn the angle of the hook. So I'm now in a position to wrap the hackle. I'll just get a good turn around the post to make sure that's going to sit nicely. And got a fibre of the post caught in the hackle there. So hopefully, all being well, this should just turn and behave. I might guide it with my finger a little to get it to sit right for the first turn. Oops. And then just touching turns down the post. Is that still in focus? I've
Yeah.
not moved the
Yeah.
camera, have I?
Still very good.
Nice fine dubbing as well.
It is, it's nice, and it also brushes out really well if you're using it for, if you want a buggier body. And
Is
for,
it, is
for
it
axes.
super fine?
No, that's Fooling Mill Eco Warrior in light olive, that one. So I should say, when I wrap the hackle, what I do is I'll angle my thread away from the hackle. The only bit you have to be careful about is where you've got the tie-in, put the catching in the hackle stroke. But then I sort of use the thorax and the hook to guide the thread below all the hackles. So I've got two snug wraps, but not too tight. Then I'll just push the tip of my scissors through the hackle stock. And then I'll put one more wrap round. Hopefully that sits, which I'll pull tight, and I'll hold the post just in case. And then I'm looking for my whip finishers. I actually bought a second whip finisher just for this, which is slightly larger. And then I'll just do my usual 3-turn whip finish, doing the same around there. And if I drop the thread onto the hook but not tighten it up yet, I am looking for that. Oh, here we go. So the cap's a bit tight. This is actually Solaris bone dry resin. It's nice and thin, works like a varnish. But you could do the same with a varnish. So just touching it on the thread lap, the thread, and then I can pull that into the bottom of the post. Make sure it's tight. Then I'll quickly set the resin. And then just push the tip of my scissor through there.
Nice wing.
So I think that's worked pretty well. Doesn't need too much. We're just pulling a bit, some of the bits of dubbing out of the way. And trim the post to length. There's just quite a quick, simple tying for a wee clink that does a good effective fly. I thought I'd stick with the dry flies for the next one and go with where are they going? Something I've seen posted on social media the other day. There's a lot of hawthorn flies on the wing around here just now. So it's quite a timely pattern. But actually, I don't want to start with that. But I tie a lot of my fishings on lochs, and I like the Sedgehog. I find it's a great pattern. Right, now can I see, is that central enough? That'll do. And years ago, I tied a Daddy Sedgehog pattern, but the style works really well for any terrestrials with a prominent abdomen, which includes the hawthorns. So I got the idea. I don't know if looking at the J.SON Sweden website years ago, and the way they do the foam detached bodies for the mayflies works really nicely and suits these quite well. So it's a tool from them, but you could use any needle or even your dubbing needle. It's not got too sharp an end. They just catch on. This can be a bit fiddly. Catch on your thread at the end, and you can put the tag in. Oops, to the spring. Right. That should do it. And I've got the length of foam here. This is actually, again, this is from Fooling Mill. It's their 1 mil bug foam. But I guess any foam, closed cell foam you could use. Yeah. Just a few a couple of 3 wraps on at each station, and then bring your thread. I get the right length here. Inside, in between the foam. Sorry if that's clear. And then another 3 wraps to make the next segment. Yeah. And the same again, and each time you want to move the thread, make the segment slightly bigger, it creates a nice taper. Sorry, I'm being a bit ginger with this thread because it's the nano silk again. This time it's 18 knot I'm using. But if I pull too tightly, it can cut through the foam. I find these bodies are quite good as well because it makes it quite a flexible body. It tends to hinge at each of the tie-in points. So it's not too rigid for fish taking it. So I think that'll do for this one, and I'll just try to gently throw a whip finish on here. There. So you trim the thread long to leave the strand there, and then you can, if you roll it in your fingers, it gets a nice shape to the body. Right, leave that there just now. Take the tool out. And this is it's the same hook as the last fly, but on a size 14, so slightly bigger. And because I'm going to use a deer hair wing on this in the Sedgehog style, I want to step away from using the nano silk, and I'll go to the classic wax thread. Is slightly thicker. I use a 12 knot for this as well, but it's less prone to cutting through the deer hair. Bear with me. Righty-ho. So for this fly, because it's almost a half hog rather than a sedgehog, there's only a couple of deer hair wings in it. But we won't tie the body, we won't tie too far down the hook. I think that should do. So when I catch this on, what I'll do is when I tie it in, I'll catch it in at where the last segment where I tied off on the body. I'll do that with the 3 turns again. And then if I hold the foam back and the threads up, because what you can do with the threads, if you have the thread that was run down the center of the body, if you pull on that, you can actually pull a curve into the body. So if you're wanting to do an done of some sort. But I'll get these out of the way. Trim off my waist. What I like to do is put one more segment in the body actually onto the hook. I find this gets the detached body to sit nicely. If I do that, it just sort of blends it into the hook a bit nicer. Trim off the foam and catch those ends down. That, now put on the, start a little bit of dubbing on the of that cutting time point. That's just a, I don't think it matters too much which dubbing you use. This is just a fairly standard, is it ultra dye dubbing from Fulling Mill, just in black. So actually probably a bit too much. And I want to put in some polypropylene type yarn for a wing. So this is ultra dry yarn from, again, from Fulling Mill. And I don't want this to be too heavy. So if I catch it in on top with a couple of turns of thread, I can pull that a bit neater. Tie those down. And I'll turn that to about the length of the body. And I'll also catch in a couple of knotted pheasant tail legs. I know there's only really two prominent legs on the fly, but I'll tie two in each side just for some redundancy. And I'll tie them in to be roughly the same length as the body, or maybe slightly longer. I like to try and catch them in so they sit either below or in line with the body, just so they get into the water and make sure they're visible. Seems to fit more closely with the fly itself. I'll push the other legs across so I can make sure I've got them at about the same length when I catch them in on this side. Just double check, yeah, it's looking not too bad. Turn off the waist. Try not to get the legs themselves. I'll put there's a little bit of dubbing on there, just to go over. Keep the profile right. Okay, and next we're into the first of the deer hair wings. So here I've got a patch of natural roe deer that I dyed myself. Was it a couple of years ago? I bought a full roe skin off eBay, so I've probably got a lifetime supply and then some. where I want older scissors for cutting the deer hair off. So the first patch I use bit will be reasonably small. It's not too heavy, but keeping in mind you will lose some of the hair as you're cleaning it out. And then first thing is important step is to always get rid of the underfur. So for years I used a plastic knit comb, but eventually lost too many teeth. So I got a metal one, which works quite nicely. It's actually, there's a nice spiral groove in the teeth. So it really does a really good job of getting the underfur out. And it's not too expensive. I'll just stack the deer hair to align on the tips. And then make sure they're looking okay. And for the wing, I typically try and go for about the length of the hook, maybe a little bit shorter. I'll measure it up, which looks about right. And then what I'll do is I will trim off to almost my fingertips. Maybe a couple of mil extra, that should do it. And then if I spin the thread anti-clockwise, it'll help it sit on the deer hair when I want to catch it in. So holding it tightly on top, a couple of loose-ish wraps, and then tighten it down. And then I'll bind down the waist ends. I find this helps me minimize the bulk that I'm building into the fly and gives me a nice secure tie-in. And I find I don't have to go through the faff of trying to trim all the deer hair stubs that are caught if I've left it long and trying to cut them off clean. And then I'll dub over. And really, I just want to keep the dubbing that I apply now to almost just on the over the tied in deer hair to give me a nice spot to tie in the final wing. I may have gone a bit close to the eye on this, but we'll make it work. I'll hold that. So there we go. And put the deer here.
With the deer hair, the foam and the yarn, that's going to float all day long.
Yeah, I suspect the yarn's probably not going to add too much to it. But to be fair, I think the deer hair on its own would float this. I don't know how many people have used sedgehogs before, but they float like corks. You barely have to treat them. It's a great style of fly. So these, I mean, as I say, this is almost a half hog in that it's only got the two wings. But my plan is to tie the daddy version later or after. It's a very similar fly, to be fair. It works quite nicely. And the beauty of the deer hair, it doesn't take much to get it floating again after you've caught fish on it. It's not like CDC or some materials that need a lot of work. And it's quite a robust fly as well. Again, like the same length. Check. I was just about to catch in some of the hair from the wing behind there, so I need to be careful. Not quite as neat as I would have liked, but we'll survive at that. I'll just put a little bit of dubbing off just to tidy up the back of that. Yeah, it's got a bit pear-shaped around this side, doesn't it? But what we can do is if I bring a bit of
The
Velcro, the
octopus
toothbrush
comes in
will see.
handy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's so with the Sedgehog, you always go quite hefty on it. You can sort out the shape and the wing quite well. It pulls it together a lot better than it was looking. But yeah, I find that's quite a good wee Hawthorn pattern. It floats well. It's quite easy to see because the deer hair wing stands out quite well against most backgrounds. But a useful little fly. What am I going to go with next? Could change tack a little and go with a little sort of Caddis Grub. Where did I put beads there? So I'm using there's a size 14 grub hook I've got here and a 2.8mm gold bead. I'm going to stick with the same thread. Take a wee bit to build up a taper at the start. Just to, so I run back and forth a little bit just to build the taper in and get the bead held in place at the same time.
He don't want to stay where he is, does he?
No, he's a stubborn one. I'll sort him out in a second. What we'll have to get is what was that for? This'll do. There's some plexiglass for a rib on this one. I just catch it in close to the bead anyway. But tighten it and trim it. It'll pop back neatly. And I can use the hook, tension it against the hook point to keep it where I want it under the hook. And that'll do nicely. And then just make sure I've got it all. Right. A little bit of nymph dubbing. It's got a bit of flash in it. Works quite nicely on this one. I don't do a huge amount of river fishing, but I do a wee bit now and again. I get out on the Devon, mainly for trout, and occasionally got the Eithins not far from home, but that's more of a sea trout river. But I suppose as with most people, always hopeful to fish with the dry fly, but then needs must now and again. We're not fortunate enough up here in deepest, darkest Aberdeenshire, we don't have any grayling that close to home. Yeah, it's a bit heavy. Not liking that. That's all I need to do is catch the hook point then. I'll finish the body a couple of mils shy of the bead, so I've got space to double a little darker thorax. And I'll just wind up in open turns with the floss, pulling it quite tight. Just as I was about to say, you got to be careful with this, catching it in case it does just that. Where have I gone now? Oh, oh, that was almost a disaster.
Well rescued.
Nice. Thank you. I suppose it's a key thing is as long as you take your time, there's always somewhere to go back to, isn't there?
Yeah.
Nothing's a write-off. Right, get this of it. This first wrap a bit neater. I'll do it. And in the few flies I've posted myself online, I try and show that. Try and show all the mistakes and errors as well. No one does it perfect all the time. So I know I've moved the vice there. Is that still in focus?
Yeah.
Right. After. Again, just a little bit of black dubbing. I want to dub this a little bit heavier so I can brush it out effectively. It'll poke a little bit over the fly. Okay. Yeah, nice. So put some touch of the varnish or resin on there just before I finish it. Quick set resin. And you can see that the Flexifloss pops quite nicely through the body. It's is it Fooling Mills Flexifloss in Caddis Green. It's got a nice little glow to it under the top of the light. And give it a good go over with the toothbrush or Velcro. You notice I use Velcro a lot, but I've also sort of trimmed the bristles off the toothbrush. Works quite nicely. So not quite as coarse as Velcro sometimes, if you've got some more fragile materials in there. But that's a fairly simple little nymph. It's quite handy to have. Right. For my next fly, which will hopefully go slightly smoother, I'll tie a little sea trout pattern I came up with. It's more of a variation of a couple of things, but I don't really have a name for it. But it did quite well for me last season. Picked up quite a few finnick on the Ythian of an evening. Just stick with the black thread just now. Be fine. So this is a size 10. It's a Fooling Mill Comp Heavyweight. It's a very similar shape to the Kamasan B175. So I used to use for all my wet flies. But this just nearly always fish barbops now anyway.
I like the Amazons.
And they're good, strong hooks, but I find these are brilliant. They are almost effectively the same shape, just in the barbos. So this fly's actually got a couple of tails in it. So I got a little sort of red floss tail underneath it. This is using the. You could use Glow Bright number 4 as would be typical, but I'm using this is the Semperflies Fluoro Bright. So it's a really versatile material actually, because you can use it as a thread or corded as a rib, but it brushes out quite really nicely into a floss. I probably should have brushed this out before, but
I agree with you with the Fooling Mill. They are nice hooks.
yeah, I've been using them for years. They're nice, strong hooks. I can't think of a time when I've had a poor hook out of a packet from them. I'm sure it must have happened, but generally they're very good.
Yeah, no, I use them when I'm going barbless. I love the detatched, but trouble is they're all barbed.
Yeah. It's started using these ones more. I used to use there's a very similar hook that Phone will do is a heavyweight champ, but it's got a more sort of upturned point to it. But the shank is slightly shorter, so the proportions aren't quite the same.
Mm.
So I'm just brushing this out on my thigh with the toothbrush. You can do it after it's tied in as well. That's funny. Sorry, get the scissors in here. I'll probably finish it off after. So for this undertail, normally my tails would be the length of the shank or the length of the body of the fly. But I'll tie this shorter because I'm going to put a tippet tail over the top as well. And just catch it. Oops. Oh, not quite sitting square. Yeah, so that's on top. I'll quickly tie this, catch this in for the length of the body, just to keep everything nice and smooth, because this fly is going to have a tinsel body, so I need to keep it as smooth as I can. It's got a wing and a couple of hackles at the head, so you need to leave a good bit of space there as well. So we have been slightly organised and picked out a feather. It should be about right for this, so the black tip should just be visible. Don't want too heavy a tail on this, but enough to show. Trimmed off a length, and yeah. So I want the black tips to show just beyond. That should be about right. I don't have to worry too much touching turns coming down the body. As I say, it would be a tinsel body on this one. So I'll just trim off the ends there. We can tidy that up after. And I want a silver rib on this. Underneath, and again for the length of the body, try and keep everything neat and smooth. But I do want to tidy, make sure I've got this tie-in point square. That's sitting okay with that. Okay. I'll just tidy these up a little bit just now. Okay, now the body will be is a silver tinsel. Nothing too surprising. And you could wrap this over glue or varnish to reinforce it, but I'll not bother for this fly just now. And a number of times I've done that, and you can get varnish coming through the edges if you're too heavy-handed, and it spoils the look sometimes for all the time it takes. So okay. That down, try and make sure I get all the thread covered. Turns, catching tinsel. off. It doesn't have to be too neat to trim off, as I'll tidy it up when we catch in the wire and tidy up the head before I put the wing on. But my tail seems to have gone AWOL. Yeah, I'll be all right. I'll get there. If I keep the nice even turns of wire, if we keep the angle the same, it should be reasonably even. If my vice does fine. Turn the angle off and helicopter off the wire. And I just tidy up the tail. And so I like to tie the hackles over the wings. Just, I don't know, just the way I've always done it now. But the wing on this fly, I will use some peacock sword. Really just like this feather, I've always found it just looks really nice on a fly and in the water. And works really well, covers a, to my mind, always makes quite a good impression for a bait fish or a stickleback imitation. No. Off the section I want. And roll it, see how it's sitting. It's not too heavy a wing. That should be about the right length. Catch it in here. So actually I use two hackles on this fly, so I use a red hen first. Got this. Just hackle barbs to roughly close to the point. This pattern actually turns out quite leggy because the second hackle's French partridge, so it's tied quite long. A few wraps on there. I'll double the tip back. Catch that in. Break away the waist. And so I double the hackle as I wind it. Returns. That should do it fine. Oops. Not. What have I gone to do? I'm not having much luck tonight, eh? Right, I'll do some surgery here to catch this thread back up to where I need it to be. Right, that'll do. Pull that away, and so the second hackle I was going to put on was a French partridge, but this is dyed with picnic. I get the feather of roughly about the right size. And this will be a test because I've got to be careful about not building up too much bulk and getting the right length of hackle to. I want it to cloak the hen without going too heavy. Sort that in once I tie this down. Pull everything back from there. Isolate the tip without getting the barbs of the hen. And again, so this probably need to be quite gentle and light with the amount of the turns. 1.5 or 2 turns should probably do it. I think that's just too much hackle. Let's wait and fold everything back. There you go. So, not the best example of this fly, but it'll.
You haven't got a name for it yet.
No, no, as I say, I only came up with it sort of last year and just it did well last year, but not used it too much. Again, I'll come back and there's a couple of older patterns that are fished on the Eithing quite a lot. I use similar colours, so the olivey yellows and reds. So it's kind of tied in, and there's a combination of all of them. And it seemed to work quite
MacDonald's
nicely.
Fancy, I think that should be called.
Say again, Pete.
MacDonald's Fancy.
Most important people in her life, she said.
I don't know how to get this back on.
Quite what we come over.
Like an Alexandra
It's
variation.
okay. Is it?
Yeah, I had thought about tying a Alexandra variation. Tie one with
Whitney is happy.
the red false tail, but I tie it with the red and black hen hackles wound together. It blends the hackles. That works quite nicely. But it did, as I say, it did quite well for me last season on the Eithing. An interesting wee pattern.
I love the green peacock on the wings.
Yeah, they're always nice. I find like Alexandra, I found there's a great pattern at the tail end for brown trout. They seem to zone in on the red.
Yeah, I must admit, it's one of my go-to sea trout patterns.
Yeah, I find the Alexandra's great on the hill lochs as well, for brown trout as well.
It's amazing it's not used much now, and it was banned at one time, wasn't it?
Yeah, reputedly so. But Right, so I'll try something a little less complicated. Hopefully I don't butcher it as much this time. I thought I'd try a variation on the Kate McClaren, Claret Kate McClaren.
Oh, that's another killer fly, isn't it? The Kate McClaren.
I said it's I wouldn't like to go loch fishing without a Kate McClaren or two on me. It must be about my first flights on most of my casts.
What size hook? Is that a 10 or a 12?
That's a 12. I say 12s are just about it's the mainstay of my fishing. I'll be on 12s. In a good wind and a good wave, maybe go up to a 10. But I know a lot of people don't go too small, but there's a couple of places and a couple of times where I've ended up fishing 14s and even 16s. So I always have a few in the box. Again, just tie it with it's not sitting quite right. For the rib on this, I'll use silver wire again. There we go. The pattern probably calls for an oval tinsel, but I don't think the flash of the rib is a key component on this fly. And the rib's just a bit easier. It's really just there to hold the palm or tackle in place. There's some claret seal spur. I tend to dress these not too heavily. Is it touch flow? Righty-ho. I'll just tidy up the wire. Don't go too far. Okay, so I'll tie a claret palmer tackle in. Waist from away the waist from. So I've taken for my wet flies and low flies. I've started to use whiting genetic hen hackles. They're I find they're a bit softer and more mobile than a genetic cock, but the advantage over the more non-genetic cock capes is you get more standard sizes, and you can actually get them hackles in appropriate sizes for smaller flies. Because some of the standard the Indian or Capes, you can struggle to get a size 12 feather out of them, I find. You're looking for a feather with the barbell about the hook cape. So I cut it in, trap down, so I put a, a couple of turns at the front of the fly, and then palmer and open turns. Try to keep them even. Whoops. And not be so ham-fisted.
Have you tried Christine and hand hackles at Chevron these days?
I can't say I have. Are they?
They are really, really nice, and they seem to be a lot smaller hands than some people's, and they
Okay.
go down to quite a nice small size.
Well, I'll
Their
give that a
dyeing
go.
is second to none.
Yeah. So I just rib up and open turns. I don't worry too much about the trapping the feathers. If you just, the feather fibers, I find if you just go for it, it doesn't tend to be too bad. And I'm not too worried about the couple at the head there. I'll tidy those up once I've caught the wire in. Got the wire in, I'll break away the waste tip. Always do that before you trim the wire away, just in case. Right. Fold everything back and tidy up. So the head hackle on this is either typically a ginger or a red game. Tied long enough to cloak. Right, make sure it's be about right. Make sure the tip. Fold it back. Where's it going? Try and make sure I don't catch any of the Bible, the body hackle. And just fold the fibers back to double it, get it, hopefully it'll sit nicely. You're probably looking at 2 or 3 turns on most feathers, maybe 4 if you've not got a dense hackle on it. Catch it in. And then just fold everything back. Tidy up the head. Let's use the pliers to catch that one. Take away the waste. Now put on the typical, only really need find a 3-turn whip finish is plenty for these flies and robust enough. A wee bit of UV resin on the head. That stuff is great for, especially if you're wanting to, if you're doing tang flies just for the tang, this UV resin's great because it gives you a nice clean finish. You don't have to wait multiple coats on. That's pretty neat, but I will usually go through and give my flies a good going over with the toothbrush or with some Velcro just to get the hackle in shape, but also pull some of the dubbing out into the body hackle. That's a very useful loch fly. I mean, most people call it a bob fly as well, top dropper fly. But I found a lot of time recently if you're using a sedgehog, I'll fish something like the Kate McClaren on the point and a sedgehog on the top dropper. Right, so next fly I was going to tie was another one of my own patterns. This one I did name, I called it Finley's Fancy after my son, because I took him out for his first day boat fishing last year. And on this fly, he caught his first couple of brown trout on fly himself using this fly, which was quite pleasing. Now, actually, I'll just nip across here a second. Get some beach floss that I made earlier. Right. So this is another wet fly, but not necessarily a typical pattern. It's fairly individual.
What size hook, Robbie?
So this is a size 10 again. It was quite a big hook. It's one for the lochs. A small trout will take it easily enough, but it's more for a good and a slightly bigger wave. A good wave, we would say. A good rolling wave. But the catching. Yeah, that'll do. And keep this on the top. I tie that in quite quickly because I know I'm going to put the thread back up to bring some wire down, so I don't want to build up too many wraps of thread, and I will cover that and tie it in well doing this way anyway. See, right. Catch a red and pull it back a bit. And if I pull it down, keep it under a little bit of tension, my thread wrap should sit quite neatly and keep the wire where I want it to be. I have to bring it up at the end to make sure I get a nice square tie in. There we go. So the body in this fly is in two parts. The first part being a sort of pearl tinsel for the rear half. This one does tend to do, I think it's more suited to a coloured water. I always find so orange or orangish fly is good in a coloured water. It shows up quite well. So they're peat stained waters. I actually only ribbed the rear half of this, as the front half of the body is a chenille or fritz material. So it's robust enough on its own. Tie that down. Go back and tidy up that tinsel. Make sure it's neat. Where did I put that? Here we go. I'm just going to find the start of this. This is probably a bit of a not your typical material you'd see used in wet flies. But it's a shimmer chenille. I was looking for a sort of peach colour. This is actually, it's fluorescent apricot, but it matches reasonably well with the tail and has the effect I was looking for. Just make sure. So I stripped away some of the chenille material from the core, the tie-in, to keep it a bit slimmer. And just tidy up all the other bits. Now, I want to leave, I've got a couple of cloaking hackles to tie in at the end, so I want to leave space to make sure I don't crowd myself too much at the end, at the head of the fly. And I just wrap this over. Try to fold it back a bit, but I'm not going to get too worried about it. Should trim the tail the length. I want the tail to be about the length of the body, thereabouts. Now, tidy this up a little. So for the on this. So the two hackles I've got for this is I've got a orange dyed mallard and a claret or scarlet dyed mallard. So these are tied long to cloak over and tied quite sparse. You don't want to and avoid over hackling them. I think these are. I think the orange dyed is from Cook's Hills. I got these from. Again, scratch that in. Put that back a bit. If I break this away, I want to hold the thread under tension just to make sure it breaks away cleanly. The feathers, when you wind them as a hackle, they're quite sparse anyway. You don't get too many. Barbules per turn. So right, that across. Now this, because the stem gets quite thick, I don't really want to double this one back. I will put wrap on it.
She snores about it, mum.
It's almost like a sort of octopus style. And then, like I say, Scarlet Dyed, I'll try and pull out a feather that's not too big and isn't too dark as well, just to let the colour show. It's not the best margin. So just pull away the fluff from the bottom of the feather. Again, if I can't trim the tip. Oops. Stock's getting a bit big at this side. Let's see how that works. They do end up with a reasonably sized head on these flies just because of the size of the hackles that we're putting in. This has a huge amount of movement in it. I mean, these hackles are probably slightly oversized, but you get the gist. Our brown trout just seem to love the colour combination. As you can see, the flush and the chenille stand out really nicely under the UV as well. Good fly for a bright day and a big wave. I do have another one of my own patterns to tie. This is called a Nunton Olive. It's done very well for me on the hair loss on the Uists. It was came up with the pattern when we were out there on a fishing trip. Tied it when they were staying. It was staying in the Nunton hostel on Benbecula. That's where the fly got its name. What I do want to do is change for a slightly different coloured thread for this one.
Did you say Nunton?
Yeah. So it's actually just they've recently opened up the Downpour distillery in Uist. It's just along the road from there. Again, this is a size 10. The hook, just to make the tying easy, it's best suited to a size 10 because it uses a pheasant church window feather for the head hackle. So it's a kind of bumblish pattern, another quite leggy pattern, not as leggy as the last one, admittedly. This is a quick underbody of thread. I think the original tying I used a yellow thread. I don't think it matters too much what the thread is, but the tail on this one is a Glow Bright Floss Hot Pink. Don't know if that's the exact name of it, but I think it's the hottest pink of the Glow Bright flosses. So I'll use quite a bunch on this because it's a reasonably sized fly. It takes a good tail. Typically when you're loch fishing, you'd usually expect your bob fly to take most fish, but this has outfished good bob flies fished on the point for me. It's been very successful since I came up with it. So it's running over 5 or 6 years. It's done really well and been a mainstay when I'm on fishing out there. And I use a rib of gold wire. You can use, I had used actually so gold or hot orange. I think hot orange actually works better, but I don't know if it probably doesn't make that much difference, but it's what I originally tied it with. So this is I will take this thread back up to catch us in down the length of the body. The other thing that makes this fly a little different is the material. Again, this is a UV micro straggle Fritz and golden olive. You could try and pull out, but for this, it's quite slim, so I don't worry too much about the bulk of tying it in. I just want to make sure I don't have too many fibers going forward when I catch it in. So that'll do. Clip the hook point. We'll do that. The thread was frayed there, so I wrapped it back up the fly to get back to good thread to tie in with. It should hold. I'll just tidy up at the tie-in points. So again, the church feather has quite a thick stalk. So I need to leave it a decent enough space there to tie everything in at the end after I've hammered a hackle. Again, just try. They're going to trap a lot of the fibres of the straggle frets when they rub it and wind a body hackle down. So, but try not to trap too many as we're forming the body. But you don't have to worry about it too much. There'll be enough to get the effect we need. That should do fine there. Catch it in with a couple of turns. Maybe up a little bit.
Robbie, have I spelled, have I spelled the name correctly? Numpton, Numpton.
N-U-N, Nunton. Right, I had a feather of 5-year-old out there, but it's gone over. Right, just a second. For a red game-ish hackle for this one, so I'm just trying to gauge the size properly. Should do. It's not exactly right, but it will be close enough. Again, I'm using the genetic hen. Catch it in. A few turns. Double it back. I could take a chance to tidy up a little as well. Hold the thread under a bit of tension to break away the tip. And find a hackle. Again, a couple of turns at the head. If I don't hit the camera. And then hammer down the body and in turns, trying to keep them even. It's not a necessity, but I find if you can repeat how you're tying, it'll keep your flies looking the same and you know what you're producing. And catch in with a rib, and I like to try and keep a ribbon so matching spacing. Tidy up that barbs in a minute. Catch it a few turns and lock and turn at the head, break away the waist. Then I'll break away the wire and tidy this up. And tail about the body length. And I'll give it a little brush just now to pull out some of the body material. It's easier now than it is when the head hackles in. It covers up quite a lot. So the church window feather is the shoulder feather from the hawk pheasant. This looks quite a nice feather on its own, but it has the effect is quite, there's a nice effect once it's wound as well. I've not seen it used that often. This is why you can see this isn't the biggest of the feathers, but they tend to be quite a large feather, so it suits a bigger pattern. You could trim them shorter and tie them in at the start and fold them back for smaller flies, but I think you lose some of the effect. I'm just folding the barb just back to expose the tying point I want. Catch it in. I could fold this back. And then isolate the tip and break it away. How are we doing for time? It's doubling the feather back again. It's not quite sitting where I want. Right, so we'll do that. It looks a bit of a mess when you first catch the feather in, but we can soon tidy that up. And to keep the tension on the thread to stop everything popping anywhere. Fold everything backwards and form your head, keeping a good amount of tension on the thread. And then break away the tip. Make sure I'm happy with that. And then go on the whip finish. Yeah, when I'm trimming with the thread, I'm not actually snipping with the scissors, I'm just using the edge of the blade like a razor. You know. Yeah, the little highlights in the body and the tail goes nicely in this one. Again. Another good one that's does well in the care lochs. So I think the fly I was going to tie was the Sedgehog Daddy pattern I came up with, which is very similar to the Hawthorn I tied. I do tie that on a bigger hook. I have, so this is a, oh, actually I need to do the body first. So if you bear with me, it's just a repeat of the body I tied in the first one, but just using a different colour of foam. So I need to change the. Hang on. That's not true on that one.
The boys are awful quiet tonight. There's nobody asking any questions.
Almost forget everyone's there.
Yeah.
I think there's a few people that tie similar flags to this now, but I actually, when I first tied it, it was on the South Uist again. We were fishing in sort of 25, 30 mile an hour winds. It was fairly breezy. We've fished in worse since, but I came up with this one out there and it worked quite well for me there. But it's actually done a couple of years afterwards. I was fishing up in Caithness in June and the mayfly were on, and it actually did very well when the mayfly were hatching, which was a bit surprising. I hadn't planned properly for that trip and hadn't factored in that there could be mayfly about, and it was the biggest dry that I had that was close to anything near the danicas that were coming off. So it's just the same process I used on the Hawthorn fly, but because the daddy is slightly bigger insect, we'll do a few more sections on the body. And try and keep them lined up as I'm tying them in.
Is that a brown foam?
Yeah, it's the same type of foam, just a different colour that I've used. They say when I first started tying this fly, I used the foam from J.SON, Sweden. Don't know if I've got the name right. And sorry, is that camera still okay? It's quite a nice foam. It's quite a strong foam, and I don't think didn't seem to be as buoyant. But on these patterns, I'm not really using the foam for buoyancy.
Just using it for the detached body.
Yeah, and I wanted a detached body that wasn't too rigid, because it's quite a big fly in itself. So the concern with that is if something's too rigid, it'll stop or put the fish off. But that should do, considering that, keeping in mind that I'll tie it on in the same way as I did the other fly. Actually, I don't want to do that yet. So I don't want to make it too much bigger. It'll be plenty big enough by the time I do the rest of it. When I first tied it, I also used a slightly lighter coloured foam, and I then took a marker pen to it. So if you don't have the shade that you want, you can always do that as well. As I say, just roll it a bit to get the shape right.
Where'd you get that pin from, Robbie?
It's from the J.SON Sweden website. I got it from them. It was their pins and foam. But as I say, if you're just tying the straight bodies, you could use any pin or a sewing needle or anything. I guess something that's not too sharp if you're pull the thread onto. Right, so I want my wax thread back for this one. The deer here to come in. This pattern's also incorporated I use feather tip wings in it as well, which is possibly a bit overkill. But it just, as I say, it was tied more of as an exercise in tying of an evening on a fishing trip. I may have been tying to avoid trying to minimise the intake of whiskey, but
Is that a 14 hook as well?
this is actually a 12. But because it's a daddy, I tend to tie it slightly bigger. So I tied it on 10s, 12s, and yes, you can tie them smaller. But this is, as I say, the Czech nymph hook from Finley, I find it's really good for emergers and dries, but it does tend to tie, it does tend to tie big. There you go. So I catch this on in the same way as I did the Hawthorn fly. Then I also tend to tie this in usually with a bit more, with one more wing usually than I did with the smaller Hawthorn. It's difficult because I fish this as almost as a dry, but also almost as a, like the Sedgehog, as a sort of pulling disturbance fly as well. It's quite a versatile fly. That's too, it's a little bit too close. You could use a dry fly dubbing, I suppose, but I've always tied this with a seal's fur. On the original with a lighter foam, I tied it with a golden olive seal's fur, but I don't think the colour matters too much. And you could change it to suit the insects you see.
Today we're going to be using a new tool.
That's a just natural roe deer again. This is from the same skin as the black here was from. Something I like to do with them tying sedgehogs, and I try and do it on these is it does probably makes very little difference to the way the fly fishes are. But I tie the smaller bunches in initially and increase the size of the deer hair bunches as I go forward. It just builds a profile in the fly. Getting the under fur out again. And again, use a similar proportion for the wings. So I like to try and keep the flies all roughly the same proportions, because it means when it comes to picking one out of the box, I don't have favourites or leave one sitting in the corner for ever after. Do that. And at this point, I'll also tie in some legs. I don't tend to get too tied up in the direction legs are pointing. I tie them all pointing backwards, and I'll tie in 3 aside on this fly. Again, tie them quite long because they're a reasonable feature and trigger. Again, tying them in to the side or underneath. Don't know if it makes any difference, it's just where I like to position them. I guess if you want to tie them higher up, it shouldn't make any odds. Just wrap over the waists. Then, as with your Sedgehog type patterns, a bit of dubbing over the waist ends. So ready for the next bunch of deer here or when? I just splay the hair a little bit when I put the comb through it. You always pick out a few bits of hair, but you can see there's quite a bit of underfur in there. Removing the underfur means that the hair stacks a lot neater and it will splay and the underfur isn't there to soak up any water. Again, measure for size. Chin, holding the deer here in place. So not too bad. Now I should have some I've picked a couple of thackle tips to tie in for wings on this one. These might be a little bit big, but that's not. Again, it's a trigger, so we can exaggerate. Oh, trying to avoid catching in any of the deer here. I could tweak that one and pull it to the length of it. Doing not bad there. I'll just secure those down nicely. The wings don't need to be pointing up in the air for this, because when the naturals hit the water, they're not the most gainly of creatures. There, so we've got enough space there for a wing. Which the other ones? Slightly bigger. Put the deer here again.
I can see Pete and Eric wanted to tie some of these on next Tuesday night.
Right. That's not too bad. Try and catch in some of those stray loose ends. But I'll finish this fly off like I do with most of my hedgehogs, as I like to finish them off with a hen hackle at the head, just to add a little bit extra movement when you're pulling them, or even when they're just sitting in the water. So I'll put a little bit of dubbing on just to tidy up a little, but also keeps the wing sitting nicely actually as well. About a brown hen hackle. So this is quite a long hen hackle as well, which it doesn't matter. They don't need to worry too much. The hen hackle's good for the movement, and it's not going to sink the deer hair. So I just tie this in as I would with hackling any wet fly.
Is it just frozen for me or for you as well, Derek?
No, I mean,
It's frozen for everybody, Pete. I think Robbie's internet is gone down.
That's the trouble when you live in Scotland. It's probably gone past 9 o'clock.
Yeah, he's disappeared. Hang on, I shall message him.
Oh, Neil's scratching his head.
I was looking forward to seeing the end of that fly as well.
Yeah, it looks a cracking fly, doesn't it?
Bloody hell, that would scare all the trout into the river. Another river down my way, that one.
Like a size of a rat in some of the rivers. I don't know about half hog. I think it's a whole hedgehog in it.
Yeah, ideal for loch fishing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I used to like doing the bumbles and stuff like that at Draycott. There weren't many Draycott this year.
Is that still going, Draycott?
No, closed.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought I heard that somewhere.
They're hoping they found a buyer, but it's something to do with Tata Steel that are causing the issue with Ibrook, because apparently they own Ibrook. So,
What is it? Do they own it or do they just lease it off the river?
they lease it all.
Am I back on all right? Don't know what
There we
happened
go.
Hello, Robert.
there. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we were worried that they turned the internet off in Scotland at like 9 o'clock. They didn't give it to you anymore.
Past the watershed, I'm not allowed out now.
Yeah, that's what we were wondering.
It could be, or yeah, it's unfortunate. Being rural, the internet is an issue.
That looks a
You've done
cracking
the
fly.
anyway.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it should do. As I say, I was up in Caithness and on the St John's loch up there. The proper mayfly hatch up there. It was the first time I'd ever seen it, and this was taking fly during that. So on a windy day in the river, I can't see why not.
Yeah, leaves a lot of disturbance that way, won't it?
Yeah, so it certainly skate across the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's got a good amount of presence in it. As you say, it's quite versatile. You can fish it as a dry when the daddies are about, but it's also good as a pulling wet.
Put some of that on it. But it certainly would never sink.
I don't think it'll sink
I tend to
anyway.
be quite lazy with I find mousselin's very good on them, on the deer hair.
Yeah, this thing, where's it gone? There. You've got to put it
Yeah.
on 24 hours before you fish. It's
Yeah,
great.
but I used to use it quite. I do have a tub of it somewhere. I used to put it on almost sedgehogs when they come off the vice.
Yeah.
I soaked mine in mucilin.
Yeah. I used to have a bag. You know, when you buy a Cortland line, you get the little pads, don't you? I had a bag, little plastic bag with some mucilin on it, and I always had a big muddler in it, just in case for any days when it goes really windy, just so you can skate it across the surface. That used to work down the Barrows and at Chew Valley.
Are you my way then, Neil?
I live in Gloucester.
All right, you're not too far away from me then.
Where are you at then?
Devon.
All right, okay.
Yeah, Chew and Blagden are my sort of one of my closest type waters.
You've not fished Wimberbowl?
Well, Wimberbowl, Chew, Blagden, they all take an hour and a half.
All right. Say Wimber
And it
Bowl's on
takes
fire
an
at the
hour and a
moment.
half.
Robbie,
So every reservoir around here takes
Yep.
me an hour and a half to
can you
get
do
to.
me a favour?
Yeah.
When you got time, can you take a picture of each and put it on the WhatsApp group for us?
Yeah, well, I can do.
Magic.
Is that enough for you just now, or do you want me to? I can carry on if you want.
If you want to
I've gotta
carry
go.
on, yeah.
I'm going to say good night.
No,
Cheers,
if you want to carry on, do another one.
Okay, I can do that. I'll just grab another hook and bits and
Wanna-
pieces.
Do you want to grab yourself a drink?
I've got some water just there. I should be all right. I've just got to find where did I put the hooks? I put them down somewhere.
I don't know about the rest of the guys, but I've enjoyed tonight.
Sorry?
I say
I agree,
don't know about
Derek.
the
Yes,
rest of the
very good.
guys, but I've enjoyed tonight.
Yes, very good indeed.
I'll just say I'll read this, but I'll do is I'll tie a quick muddler. This is probably one of my favourite muddlers, Blue Zulu. Again, another versatile one. It does really well. Brown trout seem to love it, but it's also very good for sea trout. Again, I'll use the Semper Fluido Bright red number 4 for the tail. Again, this is a fairly chunky fly, so I use a substantial bit of floss. I'll actually tie this in without roughing it up first as well. And just even up the tips a bit. Normally I would tie this. This is on the Full Mill Comp Heavyweight and 10 again. 10's a good size for this sort of style of fly and this pattern. But I've often taken to tying them on my muddlers on a Kamasan B120. It's got a slightly longer shank. So even with the muddler head, it keeps the rest of the body in your normal proportions. With a silver wire rib. There we go. Dubbing.
The old Zulu's a cracking fly, isn't it, Robbie?
Oh yeah, you can't go wrong with them really. And there's quite a lot of I suppose, variations to play with on it as well. The number of different colour schemes and video.
We were fishing Limburg Glen last Saturday, and my mate Fred was catching on the Zulu.
Yeah,
Cracking fly.
yeah, you can't go. It's just one of these flies that just works, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just about everywhere and anywhere. Need to go. As usual, I'll do a couple of turns at the head, trying not to hit the camera this time. And then just open even turns. I mean, on muddlers, I might tend to put a little bit more hackle in because they do, are intending to move some water. And then catch it in with the rib. Again, I'm not going to worry too much about the hackle. It tends to look after itself then, not trap too many. Right. Oh, green and nice. He turns to crap in the wire. Actually, hackle first. There's some tidy up. Leave space for the head. So I'll trim off the tail to length now. This is the Floribite is still in without being brushed out. But if I get in there with the brush now, you see it brushes out into quite a nice effect. And it's got a little bit of a crinkle to it, which is just a little bit different. Okay, so in a second, let's start doing this deer here. And again, this is a patch of deer here I dyed myself from the same skin again. Size of fly I want a reasonable bunch of deer here if I can get it. Try and pull out any broken tips before I clean it and stack it. Yeah, I found it difficult to get good patches of dyed deer hair, so I ended up figuring out how to do it myself.
Have you tried
I think
Steve Hankins' mule deer hair?
Can't say I have.
Cracking
Is
stuff.
it good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just put in Magpie Materials in your search engine.
Okay. I'll give that a go. I must say I've not really, because I've had this skin for a couple of years now, so I've not really looked more recently. But I had problems before with patches of deer hair dyed, especially dyed too hot, and the hair goes flat and doesn't spin.
Yeah.
That. So when I'm tying the muddlers, I don't want to use the full length of the deer hair, but I do want enough that I can fold it back and tie off at the head without catching too much of the hair before I trim it to shape. So I'll trim it a little bit. And I want the hackle, the hair to be slightly longer than the hackle that's there. Okay, so now at the moment of truth. So make sure I've got enough thread. So 2 loose wraps around the deer hair. Before you pull any tension it up, and as it wants to spin, just follow it around. And then just wind towards the eye. And that should give you a good distribution of the hair. It should have spun well around the hook. And I just want to fold the hair back from the eye, which is why it's quite handy to have the longer hair there. So I can hold it back and I've got clear space to get into the eye of the hook. Secure everything off. And then I can come in with and set up to put my whip finish on, pull the hair back again. Oops, there's always a straggler. Whip finish in. And under tension, trim off. And what I'll do is I will put my resin on now before trimming it, because I've still got that. I can still pull all the hair back away and easily get into the tying point just for belt and braces. Okay, now I've not taken the scissors. Okay. Not sure how easy this is going to be able to trim at this angle for the camera, but we'll see how we go.
You can have deer hair everywhere.
Yeah, fortunately I'm in my own, I've got my own dedicated area to make a mess in, so I won't get in too much trouble yet. So it was a tip I got off Davy McPhail, was using curved scissors for the muddler heads. And as he says, just follow the eye of the hook. And I find when you're trimming the muddlers is to keep it neat, and then I come in tighter underneath. And I find lots of small cuts. Allows me to keep more control over the shape and try and make sure I get a symmetric head. Which, I mean, yes, it does look, it looks neater, but I think it's having symmetry on the fly is key to keep it swimming straight. or level or not twisting anyway.
I like those scissors.
Yeah, they're just Dr. Slick curved scissors. They've got a nice curve, quite a tight curve on them, and it suits. Find it suits these flies quite well. Oh, sorry, is that still in focus? I know I've moved the
Yeah,
vase
it's
about.
fine.
I think the trick with muddlers is to know when to stop trimming. You can always go too far. The temptation is to keep going.
Yeah.
But it's also, no, that's not bad. The hair will also shape itself a little bit after a while as well. It'll come out after it's been tied and moved about. It'll bulk out a bit as well. But that's a Blue Zulu muddler, which I found is a very useful fly to have in the box.
And it will sit in the film, won't it?
Yeah, and bulge through it. It's brown trout especially just seem to love them. But I think that's all the flies I had planned to tie tonight.
That's plenty, Robbie.
Thank you very
Good stuff.
much, Robin. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to let me tie. It's been
Thank
fun.
you. Good night. A good night's tie in there. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you.
Good night, all.
You going to come back and do another one, Robbie?
Well, if you have me, yes,
No,
absolutely.
I can't find the record button. There's a record button here, but I can't find it. Oh, typical, isn't it? How do I stop the record? Reactions? No. Comparison.
Is it the bottom centre?
Bottom center.
Of the
No, it's
video
shared
screen?
screen, that is. No,
I've got well, on my one, it's sort of 3 buttons to the right of that little circle thing.
that's reactions.
Ah,
Let's try that. Raise hand. No. Anyway, thanks for tonight.
thank you. Cheers out.